Tony Bagley's final night. On Halloween night in 1994, 7-year-old Tony was out with his family trick-or-treating. He was wearing a skeleton costume in order to get in the spirit of the holiday. However, the family was approached by a masked man, who began shooting at them. Tony was shot in the head and was rushed to the hospital. He would later die from this. Tony's older sister, mom, and aunt were also sprayed with gunfire but survived. The sister, Chanel Bagley, has to get part of her liver removed, while the mother and aunt were treated and released. The identity of the mass shooter was never found, but it's thought of the whole thing was a gang-related incident. This is because the father was involved in many gang activities.
Last night at the Viper Room. 23-year-old actor River Phoenix was with his friends on the night of October 30th, 1993. They decided to go to the Viper Room, an LA nightclub owned by a fellow actor Johnny Depp. At the club, they did the lethal act of speedballs. Speedballs are a mixture of cocaine with morphine or heroin. Later in the night, River would find Bob Forrest, a fellow friend. "Bob," he said, "I don't feel so good. I think I'm ODing." Not too long after, someone shouts over the music to call 911. River is dragged outside for an ambulance to show up. He died on the morning of Halloween, before ever getting to the hospital. 20 years after the incident, Bob would write the book, Last Night at the Viper Room. It explores Bob's point of view, not just with that night, but with River's overall drug problems. He writes, "The drug routine stayed pretty consistent for all of us. First, smoke crack or shoot coke directly into a vein for that 90-second electric brain bell jangle. Then shoot heroin to get a grip and come down enough to be able to carry a conversation for a few minutes before you start to cycle again."
The murder of Martha Moxley. In 1975, this 15-year-old high school student decided to go with her friends on Mischief Night. This involved a lot of standard pranks like ringing bells and toilet papering houses. The next morning, on the 31st, her body was found in a backyard underneath the tree. A broken golf club was found nearby. Eventually, the club was traced to fellow student Thomas Skakel, who was the last person to see Martha. However, it was actually his brother, Michael Skakel, who committed the crimes. He would brag about it to his friends, saying, "I'm going to get away with murder. I'm a Kennedy." And for quite a long time, he was right. This is because the two brothers were the nephews of F.L. Skakel Kennedy, the widow of Robert F. Kennedy. The case would reopen in 1991 from renewed interest, and Michael would finally be charged. Starting in 1998, he has been sentenced to life in prison.
Cradle snatching. On Halloween 1977, infant Nima Louise Carter was kidnapped from her cradle. What's really creepy about this is that all the doors and windows were locked, meaning the abductor would have had to have been hiding in the closet. A month later, at an abandoned house 4 blocks away, a group of local kids opened up a strange fridge. Inside was a decomposing infant corpse. Nima has died of suffocation and was later thrown into the fridge, but it's still a mystery of who committed this crime.
The mystery of orange socks. 2 years after the snatching of Nima Louise Carter, an unidentified body was found in a drainage culvert along this highway of Texas. What was strange about the body was that not only was it wearing an abalone shell ring, but she was wearing nothing on but a pair of orange socks. It was later discovered this is one of the many victims of the serial killer Henry Lee Lucas. He claimed to have picked up the victim while she was hitchhiking. He remembered her name as Judy or Joanne.
Indianapolis Coliseum explosion. Hundreds gathered to the Indianapolis State Fairgrounds Coliseum to watch the Holiday on Ice show. During the final minutes of the show, a 100-pound propane tank exploded beneath the seats. This blast sent large pieces of debris and many spectators flying into the air. This led to the deaths of 74 people, with 400 more being injured. The situation was handled poorly by emergency responders. 9 minutes after the explosion, WRTV television station photographer Dick Baldwin arrived on the scene. He described it all as something out of a movie.
The masked shooter. On Halloween of 1982, 69-year-old Marvin Brandland and his wife Ethel were handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. They both lived on Dodge, Iowa, and were used to doing this every year. At one point, they opened the door to see a tall man wearing a mask. He said, "Trick or treat, give me your money, or I'll shoot." Marvin tried to remove the mask, but the man came into the house and took out his gun. He demanded that the couple take them to the basement so that he can take the money from their safe. The couple became suspicious since few knew of their safe. They believed this was a family member playing a prank until Marvin tried grabbing the gun. Marvin was shot in the throat, later dying from his injuries. The man ran off, leaving his mask behind. Traumatized but from her husband's death, Evelyn would die a few months later. The identity of the intruder is still unknown.
The kidnapping. A 9-year-old boy whose name was never disclosed went trick-or-treating alone on Halloween of 1986. He would go missing later that night. After a long search, the child would eventually come home at 3 in the morning. He was surprisingly cheerful and would begin to tell his family about the night that he had. While collecting candy, a man stopped his van and invited him in. They went back to the man's house and down into his basement, where his child would endure several hours of sick and twisted games with this disgusting individual. The man would eventually drive him home on the other side of the block, and when he arrived home, he appeared to be wearing an entirely different outfit. After the child finished telling his stories, police were called and arrived at the boy's house shortly after. However, they were unable to learn from the child where exactly this man's house was located. And as far as we know, this pedophile is still out there. And although Halloween is an exciting time for children, it is absolutely necessary to remind our kids to never speak to or go anywhere with a stranger.
The Gang Shootout. In December of 1995, 3 former gang members are finally found guilty of the murder of 3 teen boys. The 3 murderers confused the boys for rival gang members on Halloween 2 years prior. One of the gang members is also charged for the attempted murder of Robert Lee Prince, which occurred a couple of days before. Even if it took a couple of years to do so, these 3 are to be locked up for a long time.
The mysterious couple. On Halloween of 1999, in a small Minnesota town, an unknown couple was giving out large paper bags to trick-or-treaters. According to those who opened the bags, they weighed up to 4 pounds and contained a bloody human hand. 6 in total were given out, 2 left hands and 4 right hands, meaning 4 handless bodies would have had to be involved. What's really strange about this is the couple themselves. The woman who answered the door would look to someone hiding behind the door in order to hand out the bags. She would tell the trick-or-treaters to wait until they got home to open them. And after some investigating, it turns out the couple didn't even live in that house. In fact, the home is vacant, with them leaving in their car at the end of the night. Nobody knows who this couple is or who the hands belong to.
Halloween Hit and Run. Visitors to a local haunted house in Granby, Connecticut on Halloween in 1997 were surprised by a strange act. Many walked by a dying woman who had been just hit by a car, thinking it was a part of an attraction. However, this is definitely not the case. Later found dead at the scene, Kimberly Kitcheros was found with pieces of broken mirror and paint chips. The evidence was traced to a couple of men who took steps in order to hide it. This involved taking it to an auto body shop out of town. An incident similar to this was of the death of a woman who hanged herself on a tree. Many mistaken it as a morbid Halloween decoration, which wasn't the case.
The Egyptian airline crash. What started off as another standard flight from New York to Cairo soon became a living nightmare. On this 1999 Halloween flight, the co-pilot decided to do something so horrific no one could have seen it coming. This co-pilot was known for his many acts of sexual misconduct. He was reprimanded for this a lot, one coming just moments before takeoff. An executive informed him that this would be his last flight, which would carry extra pay. This executive would be on this flight, making this act of revenge even more perfect for him. During the flight, as they passed New England, the captain briefly left the cockpit. This co-pilot ordered a young officer out before pushing the plane into a nosedive. He cut the power to the engines, with the pilot soon coming in to struggle for control. Even when the plane was taken out of the nosedive, the stress was too much for it. The plane crashed over the Atlantic Ocean, killing everyone on board.
The Haunted House Stalker. This next story is unconfirmed, but it was featured on Mr. Nightmare's channel. The narrator and his friends, each being 20 years old, ended up going to Scare House journey to basement. It's implied this took place on Halloween of 2013 in Pittsburgh. This extreme haunted house involves a maze in which you try to locate the basement, while getting occasionally jump scared. After finishing it, they end up heading towards home. While walking, they end up getting stalked by a man wearing a dark robe and a bloody pig mask. He kept following them up until 5 blocks, until they reached the home of their friend Eddie. At this point, the man was an employee at the house. Eddie's dad ended up showing up and scaring off this attacker with a pistol, which is how the story ends.
Halloween prank gone wrong. Carl Jackson and his girlfriend were picking up their 9-year-old child from a party on Halloween of 1998. On their way, a bunch of teenagers struck their car with eggs. Carl stepped out of the car to argue with them when suddenly one of the teenagers pulled a firearm out and shot Carl Jackson in the head, killing him instantaneously. What's extra tragic about this event is that Carl Jackson typically avoided going out on most Halloween nights out of fear for his safety amidst a dangerous and crime-ridden location.
The Lethal House Party. An online story details the narrator at his friend Nick's house for a yearly Halloween party in 2012. A lot of drinking, smoking, and the like occurred here, with the narrator Nick and 2 other friends hitting a bong in the room upstairs. Suddenly, they hear a bunch of loud bangs coming from downstairs. The group begins to hide as they heard the sounds of screaming coming from both guys and girls. A group of intruders had broken in, wearing a fedora and vendetta masks. They end up killing 2 people during this raid and asked everyone else for their money. When Nick was unable to get them the money they wanted, they asked for his most valuable objects. He was eventually able to get them to leave, and the police were called. These men were seemingly never caught for this, and Nick grew depressed from this incident. He eventually committed suicide less than a year later.
The Candyman. One of the most infamous events to have ever occurred on Halloween happened in 1974. Ronald Clark O'Brien was given the nickname Man Who Killed Halloween, as well as the Candyman, by murdering his 8-year-old son Timothy. The O'Brien family began this evening with dinner before Timothy and his friends set off for trick-or-treating. Ronald would catch up to them, giving them each a pixie stick. However, these pixie sticks were laced with potassium cyanide. Timothy would be the only one to have one, which would kill him. Now, why would Ronald do this? Well, he was in debt. So he decided the only way to fix this was to collect on Timothy's life insurance. After being in prison for over 10 years, he was sentenced to death. Because of him, the urban legend spread of strangers putting unedible things in candy, which affects the holiday today.